Ready to unlock your inner hero? Well, today we're taking a deep dive into Jungian philosophy to see what Carl Jung had to say about it.
It's going to be a fascinating journey.
I'm ready. So, when we talk about the hero here, we're not talking about, like, Superman, right?
No, not exactly. It's more about a blueprint we all have inside us. It's the hero archetype.
Okay, so not capes and superpowers, but something deeper. But before we go any further, could you remind me what an archetype actually is?
Sure. Jung saw archetypes as these universal symbols, like recurring patterns that pop up across cultures and throughout history. They represent really fundamental human experiences, almost like blueprints for how we see the world and how we react to it.
So the hero is one of those blueprints.
Yeah, exactly. But the hero's journey isn't really about saving the day, at least not in the literal sense. It's more about facing your own personal challenges, like pushing past our limits and trying to reach our full potential. Really, it's about the potential for heroism that exists within all of us. It doesn't matter who we are or where we come from.
I love that. But, when I think hero, I kind of think about villains and obstacles, like the things that the hero needs to overcome. How does that all fit in?
That's a great question. You see, to understand the hero, Jung believed you really need to understand the idea of the shadow self.
The shadow self.
Yeah, the shadow self. It's the part of yourselves that, well, we might consider negative or maybe unacceptable. It's kind of like the flip side of that hero coin.
Oh, so you mean everyone has a dark side? Is that what we're getting at?
It's not quite as simple as good versus evil, but it is about recognizing that we all have these traits and impulses that we might not want to admit to, even to ourselves. And Jung argued that trying to bury those aspects or pretending they just don't exist, that actually makes them stronger.
Makes sense, I guess. But how do we even know what our shadow is? I mean, it's called a shadow for a reason, right?
It's definitely not always easy to see. It can be kind of like a blind spot. We might not be aware of it directly, but it can still affect our thoughts and feelings and our actions, even in ways we don't realize.
Okay, yeah, I think I get that. I mean, it kind of makes me think about those times when we're super quick to judge other people, Is it possible that those judgments are saying more about us than about the people we're judging?
You're getting it. Projecting our own shadow onto other people, that's a classic defense mechanism. It's just easier to point fingers than to really face those things in ourselves, right?
So if everyone has this shadow side and ignoring it only makes it worse, what are we supposed to do about it? I mean, how do you actually confront something you've been trying to hide from? Where do you even begin?
Well, the first step, and it's often the hardest, is simply to acknowledge that your shadow exists. We have to be willing to shine a light on those parts of ourselves that we'd rather keep hidden.
That sounds, honestly, pretty intimidating. Do you have any tips for how someone could actually do that, like practical steps?
There are a few things that can be really helpful. Self-reflection is key, so journaling, meditation, even expressing yourself through things like art or music, those can help you tap into your unconscious and help you bring those shadow traits to the surface.
So it's about getting curious about those hidden parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
Not about judging them, but about trying to understand them.
Exactly. And remember, those shadow traits, those fears and impulses, they're part of what makes you you. They don't make you a bad person. They might even be sources of strength and creativity if you learn to work with them.
That's kind of a radical idea, but I like it. It's like those so-called negative traits might actually have a purpose.
It's not really about labeling traits as simply good or bad. It's more about understanding their potential for harm and for good.
That makes a lot of sense.
And remember, this whole process of facing your shadow, it's a huge part of that hero's journey we were talking about.
That's actually a perfect segue. Let's talk more about what that hero's journey looks like in real life, not just in myths and stories.
Well, it's not about slaying dragons, literally at least. It's more about facing our own inner demons, overcoming our own personal challenges, and ultimately integrating all parts of ourselves, trying to become more whole and authentic individuals.
Hold on. Integrating those shadow traits. How does that work? I thought the goal was to get rid of them.
But that's where it gets really interesting. Jung believed that true wholeness, it doesn't come from rejecting parts of ourselves. It comes from accepting them. Even the parts that make us uncomfortable. You could even say that accepting those shadow traits is like the first step to really unlocking your heroic potential. See, Jung saw this whole process of becoming a whole person. He called it individuation.
Individuation. Okay, I'm intrigued. What exactly does that mean?
Well, you can think of it like becoming the most authentic version of yourself. Like it's about figuring out who you really are, embracing all the parts of yourself, the good, the bad, the light and the shadow, and trying to live a life that really aligns with your values.
So it's not about trying to be perfect or fit into some mold that society has set up for us.
Not at all. Actually, individuation often means challenging those expectations, like breaking free from those ideas about who you should be. It's more about writing your own story.
Now that sounds like a hero's journey. And you said that facing the shadow is part of that. So how does that work in real life? Got any examples?
Sure. Let's say you struggle with anger, right? It's easy to just see that as a negative trait, something to just bury and try to control. But what if, instead of suppressing it, you could learn to channel that anger into something positive, like fighting for justice or standing up for what you believe in?
I see what you mean. It's not about pretending the anger isn't there. It's about figuring out where it's coming from and finding a healthy way to express it.
Exactly. Or what if you tend to be more introverted?
Hmm.
You enjoy spending time alone. Some people might see that as a weakness, especially in a world that often values being outgoing and extroverted. But that same tendency, it can actually be a huge strength. It might mean you're more introspective, more creative. You might have a greater ability to really focus on your goals.
So it's really about looking for the potential in all of our traits, even ones that we might initially think of as holding us back.
Exactly. And recognizing that potential, that's a big part of the hero's journey. Because remember, the hero's path, it's rarely easy. It's full of challenges and setbacks, moments of self-doubt. It's in those struggles that the hero discovers their true strength.
It makes me think about how we often focus on the happily ever after in those classic hero stories, but the real transformation, the really juicy stuff that happens in those messy, difficult moments that lead up to the happy ending.
That's where the real growth happens. It's where we're forced to face our limits, to confront our fears, and that's where we discover who we truly are.
So embracing our shadow isn't just about personal growth. It's also about finding that deeper source of courage and resilience that we need to face those challenges that life throws our way.
Yeah, it's like recognizing that those challenging moments, those encounters with our shadow, they're not setbacks, they're actually opportunities. Opportunities to grow and step more fully into who we are, to become the heroes of our own stories.
This has been so insightful. But I'm curious, how does understanding our own shadow help us deal with the darkness we see in other people? Because let's face it, we've all encountered those people who just seem to embody the negative traits we've been talking about.
That's where Jung's work gets really powerful, I think. He said, and I love this quote, knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people. Think about that for a second. When we've really wrestled with our own shadow, when we've come to terms with those not so perfect parts of ourselves, well, we're less likely to be so judgmental when we see those same traits in others.
So instead of judging or being afraid of those who exhibit those shadow traits, we can approach them with a bit more compassion and understanding.
Yeah.
We can see them as complex individuals who are on their own journeys, right?
Precisely. And that shift in perspective, from judgment to understanding, that can be huge. It helps us to build bridges instead of walls, to connect with others in a more authentic way, and to recognize the humanity that we all share, both the light and the shadow.
It's like once we recognize that everyone have that shadow side, those less than perfect impulses, we can start to let go of that us versus them mentality.
Exactly. And that's when real understanding, real compassion can begin to flourish. What I find really fascinating about this idea of embracing our shadow and working towards individuation is that it's not just about personal growth or relationships, it's also about freedom.
Freedom. I don't quite follow.
Well, think about it. When we're trapped in those shadows, denying parts of ourselves, trying so hard to fit into some mold that society sets for us, when we do that, we're not really free. We're living by someone else's rules, someone else's definition of who we should be.
So by embracing our shadow, by working towards individuation, we're breaking free from all those expectations and limitations.
Exactly. We get to define ourselves. We get to create our own story on our own terms. And that, I think, is where true heroism lies, in the courage to be authentically ourselves. No apologies.
It's like we're taking back our power. We're reclaiming the right to decide who we are and how we want to live our lives.
I love that because it really is an act of rebellion. It's a rebellion against those forces that try to limit us, to define us, to tell us who we should be. And it's a powerful declaration that we are the authors of our own lives.
It's like we're stepping into our full potential, not just as individuals, but as people who can make a real difference in the world.
Absolutely. And that's something we'll explore more in the last part of our conversation. We'll look at how this journey of self-discovery and individuation can actually have a ripple effect, impacting not just our own lives, but the world around us. So
Hmm.
ready to dive into how this inner work can create change in the world.
Absolutely. I'm all ears.
Okay, well, remember that Jung quote we talked about earlier? Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people. That's where the magic happens.
Yeah, it really stuck with me. So you're saying that by understanding our own shadow, we're better equipped to deal with, well, the shadow in other people.
Exactly. When we've wrestled with our own demons, we're less likely to judge or fear those same things in others.
Instead of seeing them as bad or evil, we can see them as complex people who are, just like us, on their own journeys.
And that shift in perspective from judgment to understanding is so important. It allows us to build connections instead of walls,
Hmm.
to have more empathy and compassion. And that leads to more genuine relationships, too.
So it's not just about our own personal growth, right? Embracing our shadow. It's about creating a more compassionate world. It's about recognizing our shared humanity, both the light and the shadow.
Beautifully said. And what's really inspiring to me is that this whole idea of embracing our shadow and working toward individuation is ultimately about freedom.
Freedom. Okay, tell me more. How does that tie in?
Well, think about it. When we're trapped in those shadows, denying parts of ourselves, trying to fit into some mold, well, we're not really free, are we? We're living according to someone else's rules,
Mm.
someone else's definition of who we should be.
So by embracing our shadow, by working towards individuation, we're actually breaking free from all of that, all those expectations and limitations.
Exactly. We get to define ourselves. We get to create our own story on our own terms. And that, to me, is true heroism. Having the courage to be true, authentically ourselves, no apologies.
It's like we're taking back our power,
Mm.
right? We're reclaiming the right to decide who we are and how we want to live our lives.
I love that because it really is an act of rebellion, a rebellion against all those forces that try to put us in a box, to tell us who we should be. And it's a declaration that we are the authors of our own lives.
It's like we're stepping into our full potential, not just as individuals, but as people who can make a real difference.
And you know what's so beautiful about this whole journey is that it's never ending. There's always more to discover, more to integrate, more to embrace as we grow and evolve.
So it's not about reaching some final destination. It's more about embracing the journey itself with all its ups and downs, right? The challenges and the triumphs.
Exactly. That's what keeps life interesting. There's always something new to learn, something new to discover about ourselves and the world around us.
You know, this conversation has really changed my perspective on what it means to be a hero. It's not about grand gestures or superpowers. It's about that everyday courage to face our shadows, to be okay with our imperfections, and to try to live with authenticity and compassion. And that's something we're all capable of, I think.
Absolutely. Each of us has that potential to be a hero in our own unique way. It's not about comparing ourselves to others or trying to live up to someone else's standards. It's about embracing our own individual gifts and challenges and using them to try to make the world a little bit better.
So for our listeners who are ready to start their own hero's journey, what's one piece of advice you would give them?
Don't be afraid to get curious about your shadow. Explore those parts of yourself that you might have been avoiding. And remember, it's not about judging yourself. It's about understanding, accepting, and integrating. It's about embracing the fullness of who you are, the light and the shadow.
Yeah, you don't have to do it alone, right? Reach out to people you trust, friends, family, maybe a therapist. They can support you on this journey.
That's so important. Having a support system can make all the difference. And as you go on this path of self-discovery, remember that you already have everything you need inside you to become the hero of your own story.
It's been such an inspiring conversation. So to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep growing, and keep embracing that hero within. And until next time, happy diving.